To remove the pyramids of Giza are one of the structures that have puzzled scientists and researchers for centuries, especially the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Fear, which consists of 2,300,000 stones, and the stones are very heavy to the point that the weight of one stone exceeds 70 tons, and at the same time the pyramid is very high, about 150 meters. I know that most of us do not like the language of numbers, but these numbers are really terrifying. How were these rigid pharaohs able to lift such heavy stones to such a high height? This task is difficult for us in the current era, even with the availability of technology, equipment, and modern construction methods. So how did people from more than 4,000 years ago manage to build these huge structures without having technology, equipment, or anything? All they had was a set of simple metal tools and some wood. The most amazing thing about all of this is how did these people manage to fix the stones of the pyramid on top of each other, without any cement or adhesive materials? The answer to this question is one of two things. Either these people used jinn and this is their imagination, or they were able to reach a specific method of construction that does not require modern technology or complex tools, but a very simple method that is so simple that no one would have thought of it. The topic of how the pharaohs built the pyramids has a large group of theories, some of which are completely rejected, others are acceptable, and some are somewhat funny, such as one of the hypotheses that adopts the idea that the ones who built these pyramids are aliens. Yes, exactly that. Although the topic seems funny to some, there are actually a group of studies and researches spread regarding this topic, and a large number of people believe with complete faith that aliens built the pyramids. But of course, the talk is not logical at all and is just a hypothesis, nothing more. One of the strange things that is also widespread in the minds of some people is their belief that the pharaohs were giants and had tall bodies, so it was easy for them to lift stones with their hands and move them from one place to another and build the pyramid with ease. It is also not far-fetched that they were throwing stones to the distance. Of course, this talk is also incorrect. The pharaohs were not giants or anything, and the tallest of them was very ordinary. This is evidenced by the fact that the bodies of the mummies of the pharaohs that are in museums are not huge bodies, and nothing, but they are the size of any other human being. And also, if we look at their coffins in the tombs and museums or even inside the pyramids themselves, we will find that the sizes of the coffins are very normal and they are not huge or anything. The traditional story about how the pharaohs built the pyramids, which they told us when we were young, is that they transported these stones from southern Egypt and brought them to the current site of the pyramid, which is in the north. And they transported 2 million stones weighing tons during this enormous distance. Never mind. Finally, they made a walkway or dirt road around the pyramid, and then they dragged these huge stones on it. And from above the stones, they tied them to wooden pulleys and pulled them with ropes via the walkway and the workers, and they built the pyramids. Although the story passed us by in passing, we need to stop at it for a while. First, scientifically, in order for this method to be implemented, this dirt walkway must be reinforced concrete, because a dirt walkway cannot bear the weight of 70 tons moving on it, because it will simply fall and collapse, and the wooden beam will not be able to bear these loads either. And we need at least very strong steel wheels because we are talking about 70 tons. Therefore, the method of the wooden rollers and the earthen barrier and all this empty talk is illogical. And even if we assume that they implemented this method, the size of the earthen walkway that he is telling us about must be 10 times larger than the size of the pyramid. Some thinkers say that building this giant earthen walkway and building these huge roads around the pyramid and then removing them without leaving any trace after that is in itself an achievement that exceeds the achievement of the pyramid itself. Scientifically, it is impossible to remove the walkway and these giant roads without leaving any trace, and we have actually not found any trace of them to this day, and this makes the whole incident incorrect. Researchers suggest that the desert area in which the pyramid is located was a river area, and there were multiple channels and branches of the Nile River, and thus they transported these stones by water. But of course, in the end, all of these are attempts to justify the previous method, as we said. But with all of this, the method is still completely illogical and contains many questions that have no answers. And the most important of these questions is how did they lift these huge stones? One of the most amazing things about the pyramids is how they make the surfaces of the stones so level with such precision. The stones of the pyramid are in the shape of regular cubes, parallelograms, and rectangles. These cubes are supposed to be carved. Imagine that this carving is done with primitive equipment and simple tools, which in itself is considered a suicidal operation. Leveling the surface of 2 million stones requires an imaginary effort and extraordinary labor. Therefore, the idea of placing the rocks is also completely illogical. Thus, almost all the methods and hypotheses that we have heard so far, none of them are correct. Let's continue. It would be your will to act if I told you that the stone cubes from which the pyramid was built were poured into place exactly like regular concrete is poured, and that these rocks were not placed, or anything. This was said by the Swiss researcher Pharaonic and the Frenchman Joseph de Vitovitz, who said that the pharaohs at the time knew a way to make a certain mixture that would be an artificial rock that was harder. From the concrete that we use today, this mixture consisted of figs and some chemicals that are heated, and when this mixture dries, it looks exactly like natural rock and can last for thousands of years. Imagine that by using this easy hypothesis, we will solve all the problems that we faced with all the hypotheses before it. We will not need to cut and place the rocks with high precision. We will not need to transport the rocks to huge distances. We will not need to lift the rocks to all this great height. This is something that almonds. Well, how did these scientists reach this theory, and where did this topic start? The beginning is that there was a group of scientists searching for a secret room inside the cave, and they exposed the entire cave to a group of rays, and suddenly they noticed that the devices were giving them mixed and illogical results, even though the devices were intact and had no defects. The only explanation for what happened was that the rocks of the cave had a very large amount of water inside them, and scientifically this amount of water cannot be found in natural rocks, and this is what made them. They tend to think that these rocks are manufactured or built rocks, and then Joseph conducted a practical experiment in which he tried to reach a mixture similar to this mixture, and the experiment succeeded, and he obtained positive results. And he was actually able to make rocks of these sizes and also stick together. And currently those in charge of the research are trying to reach the composition of the mixture that the pharaohs used. And they say that the secret of this mixture is one of the many secrets that the pharaohs knew, just as they knew about astronomy, chemistry, and concreting. In other words, the rocks of the pyramids were a substance similar to liquid cement concrete that was poured into empty rectangular tubes, and when it dried, it became solid and coordinated rocks, and this is the method by which they built this great edifice, and it is not unlikely that they also used it in other buildings, such as temples and huge obelisks, meaning that they did not lift stones or move them. They were originally pouring them in their place inside tubes. And of course, we are not saying that this casting hypothesis is the sure method that the pharaohs used it to build the pyramids, but we say that this is to some extent the most logical and acceptable hypothesis, and another theory may appear one day that explains the subject more and more. Finally, no one can deny that the pharaohs reached a level of knowledge in some fields that we have not been able to reach until today, and this is despite the progress and modern technology that we possess. Thus, today we have answered the question of how the pharaohs built the pyramids,